Let's get joined up. This week's show is sponsored by Bandcamp.com, an online record store and music community where passionate fans discover, connect with, and directly support the artists they love. There's thousands of bands and artists on there, including my band, the Rye Dogs, whose second album, Pigs Might Fly, is out right now. Here's a quick snippet of the title track, which is also available on Spotify, Amazon, and Apple Music.
Because your eyes may be weeping, but your conscience is sleeping. So baby, don't you cry. Your faces are drying and you say...
It's totally free to join Bandcamp, and as the Rye Dogs are brand new members, we're now looking to grow our fan base, so your support would be greatly appreciated. Just search the Rye Dogs, that's W-R-Y Dogs, and hit the follow button. Right, now we can cue the theme tune.
Joined up writing.
Hello and welcome to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, where a little procrastination can go a long way. I'm Wayne Kelly and it's episode 165 with Karen Heenan, an historical fiction author who's making the move from traditional to indie publishing with her latest book. She's got lots to say on that, as well as what she's learned over the course of 3 published books. Before we get to that, a very quick update from me. As it's barely a week since my last update, I don't have a lot to report. I've continued writing the denouement of my story, admittedly in a very stop-start tentative way, but I have continued to move forward. Why tentative? Well, because I'm at that stage where the imposter syndrome really kicks in. You know, why are you still writing this book? No one will want to read it. It's stupid and crap, and you should have ditched it years ago and written one of the many other ideas you've got for novels. These are the types of things my brain has been whispering to me this week, and, as I try to drag myself across the finish line on a book I've already written a couple of times before, I have to keep reminding myself that it really is totally different to the earlier attempts, different in tone, hopefully with a more gripping story and an extra POV character who's taken the book in a completely different direction. I also have to keep telling myself that this is a first draft. It's allowed to be imperfect. It will have unnecessary scenes. It will have glaring plot holes. It'll have huge oversights, incorrect character names, botched timelines, embarrassing metaphors. It'll be too slow at the beginning. The themes will be muddled and confused in places. But, deep breath, it can all be fixed in the edit. And you know what you can't edit? A blank page. So this is me telling you, yes, but I'm actually telling myself. Give yourself permission to write crap, but whatever you do, please do the actual writing in the first place. Don't let self-doubt, imposter syndrome, advanced procrastination, or whatever you want to call it, get in the way of finishing whatever it is that you're working on. Just get the story down. Yes, I know I've said this before somewhere in the archives, but it bears repeating. Do the work. Everything starts with that. And if you've got any pearls of wisdom you want to share with me, then please do let me know, because I'm all ears. And get in touch by tweeting me at JUPodcast or emailing Wayne at WayneKellyWrites.com, because I'd love to hear from you. Also, don't forget to join the email mailing list at joinedupwriting.co.uk to get free stuff and be the first to find out about upcoming shows and events. Right, let's not hang about and let's get to today's interview with Karen Heenan. Karen was born and raised in Philadelphia. She fell in love with books and stories before she even learned to read, and she's wanted to write for almost as long. So after far too many years in a cubicle, she set herself free to follow her dreams, which include gardening, sewing, travelling, and of course, lots of writing. She lives in Lansdowne, not far from Philadelphia, with 4 cats and a very patient husband. And her first 2 books were Songbird and A Wider World, and her latest, Lady in Waiting, is out right now. So enjoy the chat, and I'll pop back at the end for a sign-off.
Joined up writing.
Okay, Karen, thanks a million for joining me on Joined Up. Really appreciate it. So, how's things? And tell us where you're speaking from. Remind us where you're speaking from.
Oh, well, thanks for having me back, Wayne. I am speaking from Lansdowne, which is right outside Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And it is gray and drizzly, and I am glad to be in the house and on the phone with you.
That's good. That sounds very similar to here, actually. It's exactly the same at the moment. It's grey and drizzly and very cold.
Good writing weather if we can just get up the motivation.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, on that subject, why don't you start off by telling us about your new novel, Lady in Waiting?
Okay, well, Lady in Waiting is actually the third book in a series. Just calling it a series at this point because I'm not sure when I'm actually going to run out of characters.
That's good.
The first book, yeah, it wasn't planned this way. It wasn't planned as a series. My first book, Songbird, was supposed to be a standalone, and I started something else when I finished that. And then the character from the second book, A Wider World, popped up, and I wrote his story. And at the very end of A Wider World, a character named Marjorie came in, and she had a lot to say for herself. So, Lady in Waiting, and it's another Tudor era historical. I try to write books about an era that I'm fascinated with, but I don't like to include too much about, the kings and the too many queens because those books are everywhere and I ate most of them growing up.
Yeah.
Which is why I'm in the situation I'm still in by, reading and writing everything about that time. Lady is Marjorie's story. When the book opens, she's in her early 20s and she has just proposed marriage to a man she doesn't know to get herself out of a situation. Her family has been in exile in France for almost 20 years because of the religious differences at the end of Henry VIII's reign, and then all the anti-Catholic sentiment. And, they swapped religions like they swapped monarchs for a while.
Yeah.
So she's been in France with her family, and her mother, who has remarried, is looking to marry her off. So she decides she can't do any worse for herself than what her mother has planned. So she proposes marriage to someone who is heading back to England and who currently lives in her family home. She did it to get out of France and to bring her grandmother, who raised her, back home to their family house. And she thinks she knows what she's getting into. And, it wouldn't be a book if she knew what she was getting into. By the time she gets home, her husband has taken a position as a secretary in Queen Elizabeth's court, and Marjorie ends up as a very unprepared lady in waiting, a very unprepared wife, because she's never dealt with, all that many people outside of her own family, and certainly nothing as high pressure as a court situation. So in some senses, it's a very modern story because it's two people trapped in high pressure jobs that don't give them very much time to spend together to build a marriage. And it just happens that they both work for the same person, and the person is the queen.
Absolutely.
So that's more or less the gist of it. And it spans a few years as they work through all of the fun of trying to figure out how to be married.
And I suppose as well, because Marjorie is kind of learning all that stuff for the first time as regards the court and the various different things, I guess we as a reader can learn more about that at the same time.
Yes. There were so many odd rules and regulations, and, because everyone has their quirks, I could research through all of the years of Henry VIII and his queens, but Elizabeth was a whole new animal and she had what she liked. And for the first time also, since it was a queen instead of a king, I mean, I didn't really touch on Mary in the second book. All of the important court positions close to her were held by females. Like all the people who were in the chambers with her, who served her, who did this, who did that. And under a king, it would be all men, and there wouldn't be a lot of places for women at court other than in a decorative capacity or as wives. But women in Elizabeth's court actually had power and influence because they were the ones who were with her constantly. So it made for a whole different dynamic that was fun to explore.
And as you say, kind of give it that modern kind of spin.
Yeah.
And where
I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah. And where did you remember where the idea for this particular story came from? What was the kind of jumping off point for you?
It came out of nowhere, as sometimes the best things do. Her character had appeared briefly in the early part of my second book. She was a child at that point. That book spanned a long stretch. And then she came back at 3 chapters from the end when Robin, my main character, stopped at her family home in France. And all of a sudden she appeared as an adult and proposed. And I'm like, oh, this is interesting. I guess this is book 3.
And off you went.
I really did not see her coming.
So last time you came on, it was quite a while ago now, but you came on to Joined Up just after the release of your debut, which was Songbird, and which we talked about at the time. Your break with that sort of came by way of a Twitter pitch, amongst other things. So fill us in with what's happened since then. Obviously, you mentioned your second book there, A Wider World, but now you've kind of decided to go the indie route. So talk us through what's happened there.
Well, I have gone completely indie to the point of getting my rights back for the first 2 books. And a little bit of background. I did get a publishing deal through a pitch event on Twitter. And I went with a small press. And overall, it wasn't a bad experience. My getting my rights back and going indie is by no means a criticism of the press that I was with. It just turned out I'm not really suited to that. I spent so much time doing one of the things I liked about writing and publishing was all the new things to learn. And I spent as much time looking into all of the technical aspects as I did the writing. And I don't think they expected quite such a hands-on author. Like, as an example, the first cover that was put on Songbird was nice, but I didn't feel even at the time that it was quite what I wanted, but I didn't really know what I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
So we went with that one. And about 6 months in, I really started disliking it. And I reached out to a cover designer recommended by a friend, and he and I came up with something. I purchased the cover from him and suggested to the publisher that we recover the book. And then when it came time to do the second book, I just went on with the same cover designer and handed them the covers.
Mm-hmm.
I figured
and they were okay
that
with
cost
that.
Was going to come out of. They were a little baffled, I think, by my level of involvement, but it saved a lot of back and forth. And I decided I didn't, mind the cost outlay because costs of publication were going to come off my royalties anyway. Why not pay them in advance and get exactly what I want?
Mm-hmm.
And then we started talking about audiobook production. And I have a lot of friends in the theater. I used to do a lot of costuming, and I kept up with a lot of my actor friends. And, global pandemic, they were all unemployed and home and bored. So I bartered a costume with an actress friend who performed the audiobook of Songbird for me.
Mm-hmm.
And then I found another friend who wanted to read A Wider World. And at some point in there, it just started to register that, I've decided on the covers. I've decided on the audio readers. I'm doing a lot of the audio editing. I'm not really sure why I'm still publishing through anyone else, because it's not that I was dissatisfied with their work. I wasn't letting them do much of it. And I kept thinking about it, and I did submit a first draft of Lady in Waiting to them, still wondering if that was the right course. And then in October of 2021, I just reached out to them and said, this is nothing personal, but I really think this is not the way I want to go. What do we need to do to revert the rights to the first 2 books back to me? Because I think I'd like to just republish them myself and, just go straight indie. And they were really understanding about it. I don't know if I made them crazy or if they just understood that I think I came in as a self-publisher who didn't understand that that's what I was yet.
Sure.
I like all the moving parts. I like figuring out formatting and working with cover designers and things like that. And the other thing that I, told them when I emailed them was that, I just turned 58. If I'm going to make any kind of a second act career out of writing, I need to do it on my own schedule, not someone else's once a year or once every 18 months. If I could produce a book faster than that, especially if I'm writing in a series, then I want to be able to put it out on whatever schedule suits me. And that's what happened. We got things turned around by probably the middle of November. By the time the book came down from every place, it was almost December. So I re-released the ebooks in early December and got the 2 paperbacks up again in right in time for
I
Christmas.
was just going to say, do you think because it's, they're a relatively small press, do you think in some ways that made it probably a bit easier? Because I suspect if you were having that conversation with, one of the big 6 or, one of the big publishing houses, I suspect that might have been a little bit more tricky, do you think?
And it would have probably been a lot trickier. They would have simply had teams of lawyers who, even if they were willing to let me go, would have slowed the process down immensely.
Mm-hmm.
But as it was, we just talked about it and they said, okay, give us a few days to get a termination contract together. And it was, really quick. I had a lawyer friend from my old job look it over and she said, yeah, it's very straightforward. And within a matter of a week, things started trickling back toward me.
That's
But
great.
definitely in large traditional publisher world, that wouldn't have happened. They were, their contracts are much more specific about what your sales numbers have to be before rights revert back, and there's always a much longer time period.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, I did have a contract and it had numbers and time periods in it, but my mother's biggest lesson growing up was don't ask, don't get. So I'm always willing to try.
Absolutely.
And it turned out to work in my favor.
Yeah. So what do you love about the indie way of doing things, do you think?
I like that it's all down to me. If something isn't working, it's on me to figure it out. So I like the puzzle aspect. I like that if something's not working, I can't blame anybody else. I have to figure it out, or I'm just going to sit there and look at my Amazon dashboard with a flat line. So, marketing is still somewhat of a mystery. I'm trying, and things have picked up. I will throw everything at the wall and see what works. I've got a decent number of pre-orders on the 3rd book, which, every time I turn on the computer and look at my Amazon dashboard, I do a little dance around the living room. I don't have my Amazon dashboard on my phone simply because I would spend too much time refreshing it. It's like, no, I have to go to the computer. I can't obsess. I won't get any writing done if I spend all my time doing that.
Absolutely. And do you think the fact that you're writing a series, do you think that really helps you as regards with the indie thing? Because I know that a lot of successful indie authors, or in fact most of them, most successful indie authors write series for that reason, because it does give you a chance to kind of build up that momentum and, as you say, your pre-orders and build a strong fan base. I
think it does help. I am not necessarily a big reader of series myself. And like I said, I hadn't intended to start writing one. And my books trade main characters each time. So they're more linked standalones than a series. I like to feel like I've finished my main character story at the end of the book. But if there's a portion of it that continues on into the next one, then someone else can pick up the story. I like exploring different people each time. But the characters from each book have wandered through each other's story. So if anybody misses Bess from the first book, she shows up occasionally.
Yeah, there's something to keep people entertained.
And I think the other thing that's easier with a series, at least for a writer, is, 90% of the world building is done. And even if you're starting with a new main character, you have a lot of people who are already there that you can work with. So it speeds the writing process up. You just have to research the specific events that happen in this one, but you already know so much of it. It does make it go a little a little quicker. So it's easier to produce books a little more frequently, which series readers also want. I didn't realize I could write as quickly as it turned out I had because, Songbird started out as a post work, I hate my job, I need therapy, and I can't afford it project. So I came home and wrote every night. And I did write that for myself. And then I continued to tell myself that I wrote it for me for a long time after, when I should have probably put it aside or tried to query it and, work on something else instead of tinkering with the same book for decades.
Yeah.
And it's no better for the decades of tinkering. All it did was teach me how to write. But if I had written different books during all that time, I'd have a backlist.
So do you so in terms of like what you've learned over the time that you've been doing, how do you, as you say, from that first book being published, and then sounds like you're building up momentum now, what do you think you've learned through sort of books 1 to 3?
A lot of it is just not to be so precious with my writing. I tend to write really long drafts to begin with, and then I cut them down and shape them. And Songbird was an enormous book when it was finished, and I cut a little bit of it off. But when I queried it in 2018 for the pitch contest, I probably shaved almost 10,000 words off that story without losing a scene or a character. And then I took another 5,000 off before it was published.
Mm-hmm.
And now, so much of it was just, how you should end a scene or a chapter on a really good line that makes people want to turn the page.
Yeah.
My old way of writing was I would do that, and then I would tack on a few paragraphs just to make sure they got the point.
Yeah.
And, then you just come back and you slice those off, and it's like, trust your own words, trust the reader to know what you meant so that they turn the page, and lose that extra 200 unnecessary words there. So I think it really just comes down to trusting myself to know that I have a story to tell, and not being as precious with that first draft, and just get it all out on the page and then go back and start shaping it down. I tend not to edit as I go because I'll get hung up. I also don't always write in a straight line, so editing as I go would make me completely lost.
So you say you don't write in a straight...
usually...
Yeah, do you kind of write, do you hop around?
I generally start with more of a situation even than a character. And, I'll write into that for probably about 20% of the story. So I get to know my main character and what I've dumped them in. And after that, I usually have a pretty good idea of what the end is. And I'll lightly draft a destination, and then I just kind of bounce around in between whenever I think of like a major plot point that will get me to where I want to go. And eventually I have, about 80,000 words of stuff in the middle, and I stitch it all together, and then I cut it down. It's probably not the most efficient way to go, but I'm just finally learning how to outline a little bit. The book that will be out later this year in October, which is not part of this series, was actually the first book I ever outlined. And I didn't think I followed it, but it actually turns out that I did. I just left myself enough space to, maneuver around and still go sideways and come back and meet up my plot at a later point.
That's good. So you've kind of learned as you've gone along. So you mentioned there that you kind of, it sounds like you're picking up momentum, and obviously that's one of the reasons that you went indie, because you don't want to stick to this kind of 18-month timescale or whatever. Do you think one of the reasons, aside from the fact that you're practicing so much, do you think one of the reasons that you've become faster is because you now know that you've kind of got a route to publication, in terms of you've got a way of getting your work out there, and you've got people that are actually waiting? You've even got pre-orders with the book that's coming out now. Does that kind of Does that give you kind of more motivation, more impetus to move with it?
Absolutely. When I was just writing for myself, I could take as long as I wanted. But now that, there are actually people out there who've read and enjoyed the books and who are like, well, what's next? And I'm like, if people are actually asking, I'm going to give it to them.
Yeah, absolutely.
I didn't realize how long I waited to have readers. And if I actually have them, I'm not going to let them wait any longer than necessary.
Absolutely. And on that subject, now you've got multiple books out into the world, I'm guessing you've had to deal with feedback, reviews, good and bad, and other people having an opinion on your work. So how's that been, and how do you deal with that?
Well, there haven't, thankfully, been a whole lot of bad reviews so far. The ones, there are always the Amazon reviews, the 2 stars that are like, terrible book, nothing happened, read it all the way to the end. And you just look at reviews like that and go, if it's a terrible book and nothing happened, why did you read it?
Exactly. Yeah.
I don't do 1 and 2 star reviews because I'm not going to waste my time with a book that obviously isn't for me. And I do try to think of, the less than positive reviews is that not every book is for every person. And sometimes we end up picking up a book that just isn't our thing. And, I can't expect every reader to like it. And for my second book, A Wider World, that doesn't have quite the following that the book did. And that I think the third one probably will. And I'm not sure if it's because my main character was male. And I think readers might have been expecting another female-centered book. Though it appears I am alternating. I know who my 4th main character will be eventually in the series. But he also was not an easy character to be a friend to, let's say, even for himself. He was prickly, he was difficult, and some people didn't quite latch onto him, but the people who did love that book more than the first one. So, once again, not every book is for every person. You just have to keep putting work out there and hoping it finds the right people and try to learn how to target it toward them.
Absolutely, and it's subjective. It's all subjective anyway. So talk us through your kind of process now in terms of from writing to publication, bearing in mind you're doing the whole thing now. So if you were sitting down to start a new project tomorrow, just give us a sense of how you would go about it.
Well, one thing that I've started doing, and it seems like a small thing, but it really helps me to believe that the book exists. And also because it's the most difficult thing to do at the end, is I write the back cover copy first.
Interesting.
Because it's so hard once you finish the book to try to distill it down to 3 or 4 paragraphs. It's much easier in the beginning to, write this aspirational 3 or 4 paragraphs of what you think your book is going to be. I can always come back and tweak that. But, this way I know more or less where I'm going. Just the high points of the story, whatever the major conflict is. And that really helps me see it as a finished project that I then have to actually start writing toward. It's like, well, if there's a blurb, then I know there's going to be a book someday. Now I need to make a book.
That's a good technique. Some people do the same sort of thing with just, even if it's just a log line or something, just something that kind of sets, sums it up, something that would normally go in your cover letter if you were submitting or whatever. And it's kind of a good way to kind of focus your efforts.
Yeah, that has really helped me because I still can't write a decent blurb for Songbird after all this time because it's been in my head for so long. That book has changed blurbs on Amazon probably 4 or 5 times now. And I think I like the one I've currently got, but, I'll probably end up improving it. But the one for A Wider World was the one that I submitted to the publisher with the book with only, a few words changed. Oh, sorry about this. No, don't know if you heard the noise or not. A cat just jumped over me.
I thought I heard a little meow.
Yes, Harriet wants to make her podcast debut.
There we go. She's on there now. I'll leave it in. So once you've written your blurb and you've decided on a character, where do you go from there?
I'll try to pick, I know what the situation is that I start with. Like for Songbird, it was the main character was a child at that point, and the book opens with the line, 2 days before my 10th birthday, my father sold me to the King of England. That, it gives me it gives me a starting off point. I wasn't sure if I was going to keep that line, but I did. It was not the original first line, but it was close. The second book, that one's told in two timelines, a present day, which was 1558, and then a past as he tells stories. The second book, the main character had just been arrested, and he tells stories over the week-long journey to the Tower of London, sort of in the hopes of delaying the journey, because he's waiting for Queen Mary to die because Elizabeth won't want to burn him at the stake. So it's kind of a Scheherazade structure, back and forthing. So I need my major kickoff event, and I try to write into that for a while. And a lot of my writing these days is dictated, which I started even before the pandemic because I work from home most of the time. And, we have to get out of the house at some point. Otherwise, we just meld to the desk chair. So I go out and walk around my small town, and the worst thing of all is getting a good idea for a piece of dialogue or a conversation when you're out and you don't have any access to pen and paper or your computer. And I just finally got tired of that because I'm carrying a computer in my pocket. So I just opened a notepad app and I do really messy speech to text conversation walking around town. And then I come home and load it onto the computer and tidy it up. It's not always good for description and things like that, but it really helps with making the dialogue feel spontaneous. I'll just walk along the street. Thankfully, I'm usually alone, and having a conversation back and forth between characters. And then I can come home and fill in all of the dialogue tags and all of the stuff around it. But that really has helped with just getting a good first draft out, being able to talk to myself as I walk. Ultimate multitasking.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're getting your steps in at the same time.
Yeah. If I'm on a roll, I've been able to do a 10,000 step, chapter.
Yeah, brilliant.
And I don't really even notice that I'm doing it until I get home, and it's like, ow, everything hurts.
So you mentioned, you kind of touched on it briefly earlier. You talked about marketing and how that's, kind of a bit of the black arts to you, and it's a bit of a mystery, as it is to lots of other people. And I know you described in a recent email to me, you described that you think it's something you'll still be learning when you're a little old lady. But kind of what made you say that? What's kind of worked for you so far, and what are the kinds of things that have been like, well, that's just nothing's happened there?
Well, I'm still experimenting with Facebook ads. I did a few a while back, but I didn't really want to try advertising when I was with the publisher because it didn't seem logical to spend money and then only make back, a portion of the return.
Sure.
So I kind of held off on a lot of that. And I've got one running right now for the third book, not even really trying to log pre-orders, but trying to get engagement and get more likes for my Facebook page, because I feel like if people are exposed to snippets of the book, they'll be more likely to buy it than just if I put up a cover and a buy link and say, hey, this book is coming out.
Yeah.
I tend to buy things when I get to read little pieces of it. I mean, I think it's the greatest thing Amazon has done for authors is that look inside the book feature. I don't buy 99% of the books I buy, I read, the sample first to make sure. Unless it's something I've been waiting for ages.
Like you would in a bookshop. You might pick it up and read the first page.
Yeah. But the hardest thing with, not only self-publishing, but with people not really getting to go to bookshops that much these days is you need to get them to do that browsing. So I like to, share out snippets from the books and try to draw people into the story that way. I'm involved in a fairly active community of writers on Twitter where, we tend to plan out things together and share out our own and each other's work on a fairly consistent basis. I don't know how many people we reach outside of the actual writing community, but all of us have some non-writing friends, so I hope that it shares wide enough to be seen that way. I put a lot of stuff up on Instagram. I do a lot of, graphics and things based on the stories. And I'm still waiting to see what really, not even necessarily turns a profit, but gives me some kind of a visible result. I haven't started Amazon ads yet. That's on my list for later in the year.
Yeah, and as you say, it's
when I learn a little bit more.
Yeah, it's all a new world that you're kind of learning.
And it appears to change so frequently that once you learn it, it's like, oh, this algorithm has changed, or oh, they've taken away these categories, and now you have to figure out how to retarget everything. So it's a constant learning experience, and I think that's something that if you go into it as an indie, you have to acknowledge you're going to have to deal with. I mean, you can say, I like everything about writing except marketing, except even if you're traditionally published, you're expected to do some of your own marketing. So you may as well just accept from the get-go that you're going to have to figure out something.
Yeah.
Some form of it that you don't mind doing.
Yeah. What have there been any sort of outside resources that you found useful in learning, not just marketing, but all the stuff around indie publishing? Because it's it's kind of quite daunting can be. Some people, they think of self-publishing and they think, oh, I'll just make a PDF and I'll just upload it to Amazon. But obviously, there's a lot more to it than that. You've already talked about cover art and all the rest of it. So, kind of, where did you learn about a lot of this stuff?
Oh, well, you are not the only podcast on my regular listening. I hate to tell you. Joanna Penn, the Creative Penn podcast, she's been a huge help and inspiration. Yeah. And I mean, she covers writing, but marketing and everything else. Yeah. I've got a membership to the Alliance of Independent Authors, and they're a huge resource of information. Plus, you can pop into their Facebook group and ask any question that you can't find on the website. And the membership there has actually earned its keep twice over already, because you get discount codes for uploading to Ingram Spark.
Oh, brilliant.
Because normally an upload to Ingram would be $49 to put up a book and $25 for an edit, but you get 5 uploads every month for your Ally membership.
That's brilliant.
So I was able to get all of my paperbacks up in December, and it didn't cost a cent. So right there, that organization, or that's worth its weight in gold.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
So, let's see. Sasha Black has been a really good one. Her Rebel Author podcast, that was actually the kick in the pants that made me reach out to the publisher, because she had a guest on who talked about rights reversion and getting your books back. Mm-hmm. And she was aiming that more toward traditional authors whose backlist was just kind of languishing with the publisher who no longer promoted it. But, again, don't ask, don't get. So I tried. And just there are other Facebook groups I'm involved with. The 20 books to 50K group. I don't necessarily believe I'm going to be able to make a living if I ever get 20 books out, and who knows if I ever will. But they have a lot of really useful conversations about, if you have a question about how ads work these days, or, they're always willing to talk about their own numbers and successes and failures. And it's just nice to see a broad spectrum of other people and how they do it, even if all you get from it is, no, I'm not doing it that way.
Yeah.
Otherwise we spend all of our time alone in a room staring at a screen. So at least this way I'm staring at a screen, but in a virtual crowd where we're all obsessed with the same thing.
And hopefully you're not making or repeating the same mistakes.
No, I'll make new mistakes. New mistakes.
That's how you learn. So have you so far, I mean, I know you're kind of quite early on in the indie cycle of things. You're relatively new to it. But do you still encounter kind of old-fashioned attitudes when you tell people that you now publish independently? What kind of misconceptions do people have, and why do you think some of these misconceptions are so hard to shake?
I don't really understand why there is such a bias against indie publishing, because people look at indie musicians like, oh, they're something special. They're charting their own path. And indie filmmakers get film festivals. And indie publishers get a sad face and, oh, did nobody want to publish your book?
Mm-hmm.
Even from other writers who should know
Mm-hmm.
better. So I know I'm doing my best to try to challenge that. And, in addition to pointing people toward my books, pointing them toward a lot of other really high quality, independently published authors that I know. It's like, you can't make a judgment call about independently published books until you've read a bunch of them and realize that unless you check the copyright page, you won't know that there's not a publisher attached to it. There's a lot of really good writing out there, and a lot of indie authors do at least as much work, if not more, because they want to be seen as reputable. That's why there are so many people making a living as editors for indie authors and cover designers and, formatters. I traded editing services.
Sorry, go on.
I traded editing services with a friend who had a book coming out, and she has a graphic design background. So she formatted the paperbacks of my 3 Tudor series books. It's something that I'm working on learning now for the next book that's out, but because I was on because I was on a fairly close schedule with getting those rights back and wanting to get them re-released into the wild again, we just traded services and she formatted them for me. But otherwise, that would have been something I would have had to pay for, at that early stage, because I didn't have the time to really learn it to the level that I wanted.
But I think that's the issue, isn't it? Yeah, I think that's the issue, though, isn't it? I think that's probably why many of these misconceptions still hang around, is because although I should imagine it's in a minority now, I think because kind of self-publishing as it was when it kind of was first kind of mooted by Amazon and whatever, I think and it's happened. It's not just happened in publishing. I mean, as you mentioned, the music thing has been doing it for longer than publishing and all the rest of it. I think because when it first started, there were people who were, oh, this is great. Now I'll just take this 150,000 word manuscript that I've got that I've been working on for the last 20 years on my computer, and it's never been spell checked or copy edited or content edited structurally or anything else, and I'll just put that onto Amazon. Oh, and I'll do my own cover on Microsoft Paint or something, and I'll put that up there. And unfortunately, I think most writers that have kind of been around publishing and stuff now would know that people that are doing it professionally, whether that's independent or traditionally published, I think most people would know that a professionally published, when I say that I mean independent, but like doing it as you're doing it as a professional way, they would know that behind that there's basically a team of people. As you mentioned there, you've got an editor, there's somebody looking at your cover art, there's all the formatting, there's all that stuff that you can't do it on your own. I know some people do, but not very many people can do all of those things to such a high standard, and it's certainly not easy to edit your work to that high standard on your own. And so I think people probably that are not writers, they probably don't realise that. Because I mean, people that don't write, I honestly think they think you write a book. When you tell people that you have to rewrite a book or that you do various copy edits and all the rest of it, they're genuinely surprised. Just that you've written.
So many people, will write a book, but how many of them will ever actually finish it when they realize just how much is involved in, getting it finished?
Yeah,
it's not one draft. I can't even. I look at my first drafts and, flinch, because it's going to be a bloodbath to get it turned into something that I'm even willing to show. I have a few writer friends. We do first reads for each other. And it's really helpful, even sometimes just sending along chapters as they come out. But that's for me, it's usually chapters after they've been through the first draft process, because I can't share stuff that looks like that.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. Yeah, I'm in a critique group, and it's a bit like that for me. I mean, I have been sharing pretty early draft stuff. It's more or less first draft, but even then, when I actually send it over to them, I'll still go over it just to make sure there's not anything really embarrassing and really obvious in there, even if it's just spelling mistakes. Or I tend to do things like I'll put square brackets, and I'll put, because I'm like you, I like to just crack on with the first draft. So if I've got a thing like I need to check something, or might be a location thing or a research thing or something, I'll literally check name here, or not sure this is right, check later, or whatever. And in some of those early things, I've even missed those when I've sent it to friends for the critique group kind of thing.
Yeah, I have a lot of brackets in my early drafts, because I will do enough research to know I'm not going to mess up the timeline. But then for like specific things, I mean, especially in the time period that I'm writing, so much of it is how long did it take to get there?
And I mean, my square brackets they've even got things in just because my memory's so terrible. I mean, I forget character names and things that I've come up with. I'll be 2/3 of the way through the book, and then I'll be like, so and so's mum, find name here.
Yeah. Or, if they're just minor characters, you just, whiz on with the plot and leave a bracket, name them later.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I when I was going over a later draft for Lady in Waiting, there was a point where someone named Sir Small Annoying Man walked into a room, and I'm like, "Ooh, Small Annoying Man needs a name." Yes. I think I wanted something that wasn't, William or Henry or Thomas, which were like, that's the hardest part about writing Tudor England, is there were like 7 names.
Yeah, there's not a lot to choose from.
No wonder everybody was so formal and called them Sir So-and-so, because at least you could differentiate then.
Yeah. They needed different things to...
Far too many Henrys.
Yeah. So as we kind of move to wrapping things up, it's been great to talk to you again. So why don't you just give us a sense of, remind people when they can get hold of this book and how they can get hold of this book, and give us a sense of where people can find out more about you.
Okay, well, Lady in Waiting, because it's a dysfunctional marriage story, is appropriately due out on Valentine's Day.
Perfect.
So February 14th, we've got one more week. And you can order it through all the usual retail places. Amazon, Barnes & Noble. I went wide on everything, because I would rather put myself where readers can find me than make them have to come to one or two specific places.
Mm-hmm.
You can always find buy links on my website, which is KarenHeenan.com. And I'm pretty much always going to be talking about it on Twitter or Facebook.
So go and find you on there.
Yeah, it's Karen_Heenan on Twitter and Karen Heenan Writer on Facebook.
Perfect. Well, I'll put all of those links in the show notes. And it's been great to chat to you again, Karen. But for the time being, thanks for coming on Joined Up.
Well, thank you for inviting me back. This was fun.
Joined up writing.
Okay, thanks again to Karen Heenan, and don't forget Lady in Waiting is out right now, and I'll put all of those links in the show notes over at joinedupwriting.co.uk and in the description on whatever device that you're listening to. So that's it for this week, but don't forget you can find the entire back catalogue of interviews on the website. Make sure you subscribe at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Overcast, YouTube, or wherever else you get your podcasts from, and that way you can have the podcast downloaded automatically every week. Also remember to get in touch with all of your writing news, views, questions or comments, and I'll give you a mention in a future show. Until then, thanks for listening. I'm Wayne Kelly. Happy writing, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.